Howdy y'all, I got a quick one for you. As I've been playing more and more video games, I've noticed something of a trend. The options a game gives to its players need to be balanced, obviously. Things like large heavy weapons hit really hard but have a long wind-up, and smaller weapons do less damage but can do that damage very quickly. And in theory, this is all fine. The reason I even bring it up is because I kind of have an issue with how some games handle this. Whether it be weapons, or characters, or classes, basically anything that a game tells you you can use has something of a pro and con system to it. My issue with some video games rests in how by the books the cons might be for players given options. My solution to the problem, I'll just lay out there, is do the cons accent the playstyle of whatever you're using. Say for instance, you're a big slab of steel enjoyer. You really like swinging big swords and big hammers around, but the weapon is just too slow or doesn't do enough damage. This might be the result of a nerf to the weapon because it was too strong, or simply that was how it was designed in the first place, and it's not meshing with you even though typically you like that playstyle in other games. I think a fair case is to be made if you consider that the devs of said game likely did a by-the-books fix for how the weapon works. They made it do less damage or made it slower, and now it just feels worse to use. To me, this seems like a blatant failure in design. If the weapon doesn't feel good to use anymore, then why use it? At the end of the day, you're doing it because of preference, because you thought it might be fun. And if it isn't fun, then whoops, I guess, better find something else. That just doesn't sit right with me. Now, I will admit that this argument I make does seem really fucking pedantic, and it is for a lot of cases. But in the games where you have a sheer number of options to choose from, something like a hero shooter, for example, some characters will fall by the wayside, likely because of competitive meta, balance patches, and what have you. But is it not unfair to say that if something falls out of meta and becomes so unpopular that nobody likes playing the character, that seems like a failure of design too? I've seen at least a handful of games now that just basically refuse to have a hardcore meta, either because the game is not competitive, or because it is competitive and even the weakest option in said competitive game is still plenty usable. It's not top tier by any means, but if you're a fan of how it plays, then you're likely to have fun with how it works, which is the only real criteria you need to make as a game developer, at least in my eyes. I guess what I'm saying is that the viability of something shouldn't come at the cost of how it plays, how satisfying it is to use, or just how it feels. And whenever developers are considered, the negative traits or stats of any option given to a player need to further accent the game feel. As I mentioned before, large powerful weapons are slow because they are large and powerful. It's how you expect them to act. If this convention is broken in any way, it can kind of create a disconnect in terms of player enjoyment. You get a feeling for their strength because they are slower, and lighter weapons work in just the opposite way. They're faster and they allow you to dance around an enemy, and they don't hit very hard, but that's because they don't have to. The thing I want to see primarily whenever it comes to designing a mechanic or a weapon or a character, all that other good stuff, is that the downside shouldn't detract. This isn't going to work for every case, obviously, but the more things that seem bad on the surface and end up making it a better experience, the better off you're gonna be. I picked the dichotomy between light and heavy weapons because they're the easiest to draw from, but really whenever it comes to things like firearms or playable characters or classes, I feel like the same design aspects can be taken. Not one-to-one, obviously, but nonetheless, the negatives shouldn't detract. They should be accepted parts of the player experience. In the best case scenario, they should be part of what you're looking forward to. I really wish I could come up with better examples, but I do at the very least have one. Y'all ever heard of Helldivers? I'm sure you have. This game has been absolutely everywhere, and is the current internet darling. As a result, there's a lot of speculation on how best to use the equipment given to you through the game's shop system. I will say outright that because this game is new, some of this information won't be accurate, and also, as it turns out, the simple 3-block structure of the game's stats screen is completely inaccurate, and actually there's a whole bunch of stats that go into these weapons. It's just simplified for the sake of the players. But again, I'm gonna use it as an example anyway because it's current and most people are playing it, so, you know. The game's meta currently stands as use whatever you feel is best. If you like how something fires, if you like how something works, if you like how it takes out an enemy, use it. It's as simple as that, and that's really as complex as it should be. At the time I'm recording this, there are currently 2 factions in the game that have completely different rules established with them, and as a result, they challenge the player in picking up different tools to use. This is an extremely balanced way to force the player to adapt to a situation and not just stick with one strategy, which I believe is fair to say is the issue that a lot of devs face, competent players using one simple strategy and not delving into other ones, despite the work that they put into it. And really, neither of them are right or wrong. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. My issue is that whenever the devs decide to break something and force players to pick something else. That's kind of the crux of this whole argument. That, or it was just never fun in the first place, but you get it. In this way, the balance of Helldivers is kind of the perfect storm of design. The enemies you're put up against and the tools at your disposal to dispatch them will vary wildly depending not only on the player, but the enemies themselves. This also has to do with the teamwork dynamic, which is a completely other topic, but basically, if you like the big heavy machine gun, you're totally allowed to use it, just don't expect to be using it constantly. If you're somebody who wants to take out the buildings, then you probably need to bring a lot of explosives, but that means that your close quarters combat might be suffering greatly as a result. And you can fix those issues all that you want to, but because of the teamwork dynamic, that might be better spent on your teammates. Maybe they can flex that in with their kits. Or even better, maybe nobody can and you just have to make do with that. There's not a perfect answer, but in that way it kind of makes it perfect. Nothing is too outlandishly strong, but nothing feels really weak either. That's why I think Helldivers 2 makes such a good argument here. They really just nailed down how weapons are supposed to feel. Every single one of them, seemingly. And I guess all I'm trying to say is that I just want to see that more. I'm really tired of by-the-books first-person shooters just having the same weapons that all feel identical to each other. If not in the same game, then across a series. I'm not even really asking for pushing the envelope in terms of that game genre. I'm just asking for each and everything to feel like it should. And if a weapon has to be designed with a downside, like everything should, then the downside needs to feel good too. There's a handful of heavy weapons in Helldivers that have a start up before you can unleash them. You can argue that this is sort of an evolution of the greatsword thing that I mentioned before, but even still it works. A huge 6-barreled gun should probably take time to spin before it unleashes hell. And I just want to see more things make sense and be good. That's pretty much it. Downsides should feel good. Not only make sense, but it should also accent the chosen playstyle just as well. I could go on and on about this topic for any number of examples you could give me, but just do me a favor and think of examples on your own. Why something does work or doesn't work, and what could be done to change that. Because if there's room for improvement there, then I think it deserves the time of day in discussion. And with that being said, I think I'm gonna go ahead and head out of here. Hit subscribe, join the Patreon, and take care of yourselves out there.